Who said we were not meant to be more than? I pray to know their name, so when from whence it came, they can see me. Never repent, to unmask, to ask, and re-emit, oscillating in the mist. The gloom at our past. They gloom at our past, hoping we never did, never to exist. Again, the pain train runs deep, purple like the grapevine. I stand for everything we are and more, till the end. I plan to soar a star sky, never too shy, to reach out and grasp, bask in what is. So supposed to be, preordained, it was meant for me. Hello everyone, welcome back to Poetry Journal Podcast. I am your host, Alex Mada. And that was the quote we're working with today. Here with me is Jay Taylor.
Howdy, hi.
Yeah, and what you just heard is the quote, and I just want to get straight to it, so I'll just go and set it for the second time. Who said we were not meant to be more than? I pray to know their name, so from whence it came, they could see me. Never forget, never repent, to unmask, to ask, and re-emit. Oscillating in the mist, they gloom at our past, hoping we never did, never to exist. Again, the pain train runs so deep, purple like the grapevine. I stand for everything, and we are everything we are and more. Till the end, I plan to soar. A star sky, never too shy, to reach out and grasp, bask in what is. Supposed to be, preordained, it was meant for me. With this quote, I really just, there's a certain current affairs or current events or happenings in terms of like debates and topics going on right now, and I thought, you know what, it kind of inspired this poetry, especially this piece, especially because you know, I can relate to it and what, you know, the ideals behind it, or behind the what inspired it, as well as what is being spoken about. So with that being said, I only have one question for this one.
Go on.
Do you believe in reparation for descendants of slavery? What's your take on that?
I mean, I'm trying to think how many ways to say, give me my money. Yeah, that's my stance. It's overdue. It's well deserved, and I think it's a little bit of a mistake that after all this time we're still having to have this debate with politicians and even among social groups to try and convince people that this is something that's supposed to happen.
Yes. I mean, this was, like I said, this was inspired by current topics, relevant topics right now. And one of the relevant topics in not only our community, in terms of, it's pretty much, you know, all over right now. I think, you know, the Jamaicans are seeking reparations. FBAs, as they've technically, you know, termed themselves, which is based on their lineage, foundational Black Americans. You know, and so it's kind of like, it's a situation where everyone is pretty much, it's kind of open a dialogue for that debate. And I just wanted to ask the question, and just kind of speak on it in a sense. But if I had to say, I would say, of course, I believe we deserve reparations. But that's debatable in itself, and I think it's obvious that we both agree on that. But the following thing, go on. What are you
No,
gonna say?
I was going to say, well, you say it's debatable. So my question, I guess, counter question would be, which part of it would you say is debatable?
Well, I think if I was to play devil's advocate, in a sense,
Yeah.
I think that's where maybe perhaps there's a debate about, what, is it deserved? A lot of the situation, well, not the situation, a lot of the arguments that I've heard recently about it is more about, what, well, that was a long time ago. We're long past that. Get over it. And then there's situations where it's almost like you're not the only one that's been enslaved. Yes, 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 yes. Like I said, if I was to play devil's advocate, but
Yeah.
there's also the situation of like whether or not they do, what is the pushback with them having it? If they in fact did accomplish, getting this passed and actually receiving reparation, what is the pushback? Like, what is the problem behind that, do you think? Like, why do so many people have an issue with it?
I think there's a couple of things in there, because I think one of them is definitely going to be a general social kind of, oh, it's not fair that they get money kind of thing that, we expect to see any time money is thrown around. The other thing I think is probably just political or economical, maybe,
Yeah.
Combination of the two, where when they try to add up, whenever you look at the figures of what they reckon it would cost the US government, the UK government to pay back the descendants of the slave trade, it comes way up trillions, and more time it would bankrupt the countries to make those payments. Now, for me, I say that's not my problem, but I think that's probably one of the largest reasons why when the royal family or the government or anyone else is asked those kind of questions, their first instinct is move on. Happened a long time ago. We're going to move forward. We're going to try and and it's kind of like I think this is because you don't realize this would be the end of you if you had to pay back. Because bear in mind, they made payments when they first abolished it, but they made payments to the slave owners. Like, I'm so sorry, you're no longer going to have all this free labour, so we'll give you 20 million, I think it was.
Yes.
Nowadays, that's like 220 million or something stupid. So it's like, you lot made payments for slavery. You just made it to the wrong person. So even more so, I feel like we deserve it, because it's like you really took the piss.
Yes.
And but I think, I don't know which government is going to look at that total and go, let's work out a payment plan, because Germany only just finished paying off, or I think they're still paying off Holocaust survivors.
Yes.
And that happened over the course of what was it, 1930 something to 1950 something. I can never get the dates right. But the Holocaust occurred within a certain set period of time. Within, let's say, within our lifetime, let's say, historically speaking. So if it's taken them someone's entire lifetime to just about get around to paying back all the survivors, and not everyone's claimed either, because some people don't want the money. Some people are like, screw you, ruined my life, I'm not involved. Oh, we lost a diamond. But when it's the slave trade now, 400 years of slavery. It's 15 million people, more than 30 million deaths, if we look at just the deaths across the
Yeah.
period, the totals, you're looking at more money than history can pay back. You know, it's kind of, and I think that's the part that scares people, or at least not people, because I think the social side of it is very much just a jealous kind of bitterness.
Yes.
But I think with the politics and the people in power, I think
Yes.
for them it's doing the math and going, oh no,
Yeah.
that's too much money, and deciding, do you know what, it was 400 years ago anyway, we can this
Yeah.
happen.
We
It's
can,
like actually,
you know, we can
we'll
look past
just
that.
pretend it wasn't there, but it only ended 150 years ago. You know, I'm sure
Yes.
most of my generation, our generation, have grandparents who were born to slaves, you know, or great grandparents,
Yes.
rather, who were born to slaves. You know, it's not
Yes.
that. So when you put it in that sense, it's like it's really not that long ago. You know, they like to say
Very
that,
much so.
you know, it started. And I think it's only because it started so long ago that this argument of it happened a long time ago.
It happened a
is
long
even a
time
thing,
ago.
but it's like no, it started a long time ago. It ended fairly recently. You know,
Very
but
true.
that's my.
I think at this point, it's almost, in my mind, it's almost like it's got to be a fixed design where there's never an objective outlook, in a sense, pertaining to what it did and, you know, the outcome of it. Because as you can see, I mean, if we were to think about, you know, the repercussion of them even giving back half of what, you know, is owed because of that, it's almost like the only thing I can vision an equivalent to is almost like, you know, what went down with Africa, or what is currently going down in Africa, in terms of like how the draining of the resources was so extreme, where, you know, it left the people almost, you know, scorching the earth, in a sense, to try and actually survive independently and live, you know, within their own society, you know,
Yeah.
with certain privileges that, you know, the West is just kind of like, they have pretty much in abundance compared to Africa. Do you get what I mean? So it's almost like, I believe it's deserved. I believe in, and I have a few thoughts. I believe it will be accomplished.
Okay.
Sooner or later, I believe it will be accomplished, because as you see, people are really finding loopholes to make sure the progression is continuous and is consistent. You know, so I do believe that will happen. But that begs the other question. I mean, it's quite obvious who's responsible, in terms of like, you know, everything pretty much starts with the British Empire, I would say, and a lot of Europe, of course. But here's another thought. How much responsibility would you put on, say, Africa, our ancestors, in a sense? Because to my recollection, and this is just an estimation, I've never heard of I'm gonna go rescue them attempt, per se.
Yeah.
In fact, like as history tells it, as we know it, they were actually participants in the whole situation. So and this is another question as well I've heard, and you know, like, how much blame would you, or how much responsibility would you put on their side of things? Like, or do you feel like they should be held accountable?
See, I do struggle with that topic in general when it comes to what happened with the people who were there as it happened. You know, like what was their part in it? What were they doing? How did they fight or whatever? And because obviously the narrative most of us are told is, you know, Africans sold Africans. That was what we were all told. Is we were sold into slavery by our own people. That's what we were told.
Yeah.
And I think for the longest time, I really sort of quite strongly believed that without any question or without any kind of quarrel or anything, I just assumed that was fact.
Yes.
And I suppose the more I think about it, and this is purely just me sort of developing thought and just sort of considering humanity more and considering people and considering what war looks like, and also considering how politics worked back in those times, you know, death was incentive for a lot of horrible transactions.
Yeah.
Or sorry, the prevention of death was an incentive for a lot of transactions. So, for instance, and this is purely just my hypothetical, but if you were in charge of, let's say, a particular tribe, not one of the ones that had any of the warriors, not one of the ones that had anyone who was in charge of keeping things safe.
Yes.
Just a regular old do your own thing kind of tribe. And then someone came to you and put pressure on you and your people and threatened to kill everybody, or threatened to kill, you know, threatened to start a war, or threatened to, you know, I don't know, it's like, we can't know. Unfortunately, there's never enough documentation, there's never enough, you know, reports and recounts of these things. Plus, the winners get to tell history anyway, so there's no way of knowing what really went down. But the way I start to assume is, I think, well, the way that colonization has occurred in history, it's rarely, I can't think of a single version, but rarely ever happened peacefully. It's rarely ever happened without threat of life, or without destruction of land, or destruction of wealth, or property, or economy in general. So when I use those facts together with this idea that we were sold by our own, I always think to myself, but what would make someone do something like that? What circumstances were they facing, or what was the situation where they may have ended up having to release X amount of people? Because what if the threat was to lay waste to the entire land unless you give us half, let's say. Give us half your people, you give the other half. You know? And if we're looking at weapons in history, you know, different nations, different cultures all had very different weapons at different times in history. So if we're looking at strength in weaponry and ability to defend yourself against different types of weaponry, that's another factor to bear in mind as far as, well, what if even if they had an artillery, let's say they had a whole army ready to go, ready for the smoke, and then the Brits came with actual smoke and you know, guns and the cannons and all that other nonsense they were using. How much defending can you really do before you have to surrender, or before you risk losing it all and say, we're going to go down fighting? And in which case no one wins, because at that point, and for all we know, and that's the other thing that sort of always bothers me about the lack of information around that time, is we don't really have any evidence that there wasn't a massive battle or even massacre of our people before the survivors were taken. Do you know what I mean? Like, we don't know that every time they went there, they didn't battle people and then take whoever survived or surrendered. We're told that it was a very willing transaction of, in exchange for your coins and gold and silver, we'll give you 20 people, we'll give you 200 people, we'll give you 2,000. We don't know that it wasn't a deathly battle, and each time they only took what was available, which happened to be hundreds. But again, if we're looking at power, it wouldn't have been difficult to overwhelm a group of people if they didn't have the means to fight back.
I mean, I don't totally want to say without knowing specifics, but I am aware allegedly that there were battles, in terms of like resistance against the whole colonization situation, even like places like Congo, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
So there were a few places, but it also stands to reason that there were a factor or like possibly a situation where certain people were, or like in our situation where that tribal division possibly played a factor as well.
There is that. There is
You know?
that. I suppose, because as you were saying that, I was actually just thinking, one of the things I suppose I miss when I do these hypotheticals in my head,
Yeah.
I miss the flaws of humans
Yeah.
and the fact that not everyone is a saint.
There's always
And that there are
been
some-
corrupt humans in a
Right.
sense. So
Right.
that's something you
So
can't get away
within
from.
that environment, exactly.
Yeah. So it's a tricky one for sure. And we even have I mean, one famous one is Shaka Zulu. So where they had the battle between them and the British. Obviously, they ended up losing, but there was a great resistance in a sense, and obviously we still remember and speak his name up until now. So clearly, he was really a force to be reckoned with in a sense. So I don't think it's even fair to say they weren't pushed back in terms of like rival, like the opposition, the opposing force in terms of like freedom for black people at the time. But clearly, it stands to reason that it wasn't enough and they weren't successful because we are here.
Yeah.
But there's also a situation of like, do you know who your enemy is? And I say that to say because religion was also used as a weapon in this whole situation.
Oh yeah.
And so the Good Samaritan was in certain instances a wolf in sheep clothing. So I'm sure you look at black people even now today, globally, and we see somebody positive or good, right vibrations, or so appearance would dispose, but and so it's almost like there's still a welcoming thing for anybody, where that's concerned. And sometimes I do wonder if that is a situation as well where we're concerned, where they didn't know who their enemy were to begin with, and so by the time the fighting, etc., the tools of war was so already in play that to an extent there's already a chink in your armor. Mentally, you already believe your enemies are, well, you don't have a perception of who your enemies are. And so by the time you get an idea of what the situation is, it's too late, in a lot of instances. And so perhaps maybe then it will come into play what you're surmising currently about, they're in a situation where things are developing, but it's almost like it was too late. And so now it's almost like, okay, lesser of two evils in a sense.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure I'm not sure if you've seen. There's certain films where you watch and it's kind of like, people might go go to war, or they're on the verge of going to war. And so to avoid war, the weaker side, to avoid war, they would sacrifice their son, a daughter, or offer marriage or something like that, to kind of water down the situation to a point where they can coexist together without bloodshed. And so I can flourish beside you. Of course, you're more powerful, but I bow down to you. So, you know, and so it's almost like kissing the ring in a sense. And so you allow that, you know, but clearly that wasn't the case. And so colonization don't hold such rules. So it's kind of like there was no option of kissing the ring. You either give me what I want, or I'll take everything and scorch the earth anyway, which they did anyway. So, and still do it. So it's kind of like that's the situation that we're in, you know.
Yeah.
But okay, fair enough. Let me go into next segment. This would be quote 2. The lineage runs deep, dark like the longest ancestry. You are the sky to unlocking thy destiny. Now I peek through God's eyes, if only to get close to me. Only when you will see we are one in the same. The complex tells tales, so many signs. Greatness awaits. If only you were brave, reach out and greet it. The path is paved, fingers gripped to hold it. It has been waiting for decades. Preordained. Yeah, obviously with this one, I'm still being consistent with the whole preordained topic, so to speak, but from a different angle. So this one, we speak about things being preordained all the time. It stands to reason that despite our oppression, and I'm talking like just in general, there are still constant advances and thriving as humans. So could you honestly say that after all we've been through, speaking of the turmoil and disasters, was it preordained that we could be the one to be appointed to seek greatness? The people that would become a candidate to grasp the universe itself, potentially one day. Maybe I'll break it down more.
Do that.
So I'm speaking from like partly futuristic, but also in a sense of like from my understanding. I'm not sure if I mentioned this saying before, but you know they say hard times breed strong men. And so it's almost like it's put me in a space where I think about that, and it's like the chaos that we've been through as human beings has made us thrive and dig deep to come up with genius in a sense. And I think that's what led us to where we are now.
Okay.
To the point where we're almost looking or exploring the universe, if only by a machine alone, where like you can send man to the moon or send a probe to Mars, you know, send to different planets. And one day I believe, you know, this is going to keep developing, and one day, who knows, we might be in another solar system in another 500 years. And so it brings me back to the idea of like, where did this all start and how did this all develop? Because as you know, with evolution itself, it's almost a need to evolve, a need for change because times are dire, and so hence the term you evolve or you die like the dinosaurs, and so it begs the question: why are we the one to actually be the candidate for greatness as opposed to another animal that's or like even some animals from the animal kingdom where it's almost like a gorilla, where it's almost like they've developed to like say level 5 intelligence, as opposed to us where we're greater than that. And so do you understand what I mean?
I do. It's very meta philosophical slash. It's definitely a deep one. So if I were to just focus on the last question, as far as why us and why not other animals?
Yeah.
That alone could have so many different theories or versions of why that's the case, because we could go the scientific route, we could go the theological route, we could go the philosophical evolution, so that's a big question. Yeah, I feel like it's sort of mind kind of blown up a little bit there with that question, but I guess if I was to just take my sort of belief system and ideals and things to do that question, I would say, well, I do believe in higher power, and I do believe, let's say that, we're all created. So by that token, I can sort of go, okay, well then the reason that it's the humans and not the animals is because it was created that way. So it's part of the system that was created for humans to thrive in that way. But if I were to take, let's say, evolutionary as angle, then I guess we'd have to look at looking at, I guess, ape development, ape evolution, or, early man and Neanderthals and those kind of things, then that would kind of be more of a luck of the selection kind of thing, in terms of we just happen to be the species with the right amount of bones and the right amount of matter and the right amount of X, Y, and Z that was able to evolve in the perfect way over time to allow us to be the ones on top. That being said, realistically speaking, we're not really the ones on top in terms of if we look at us as just animals. Because if our society had lions and tigers and bears roaming around, we'd all be very, very dead. Very, very dead. Very dead. So, by that, it's kind of like we're in charge because we're the ones who were lucky enough to have opposable thumbs and, for those kind of biological things to develop in our favor and not in the tiger's favor. Because again, if a tiger has opposable thumbs, if he wants in, you close the door, you lock the door, he just unlocks the door from the outside and lets himself in. We would be screwed. Go on.
I mean, I get what you're saying, but it sounds to me like it sounds to me like, when you mention animals, of course they're more, I think they're just better killers, if I'm honest. But they're not better thinkers. Which is what have us here, which is why we are still here today.
I would debate that one ever so slightly.
Well, when we say thinking, we're not even debating instincts, but we could, because to an extent, instincts is a massive part of it. But I would say it wasn't necessarily lacking instincts then as it is now. So maybe then our instincts would probably match our intellect more at the time, but it's almost like our intellect completely outweighs our instincts in the here and now. Unless you're talking about certain people that would actually, you know, that they're very aware and want to master both and be on top of both. I don't think that's a factor. Do you understand? So it's different.
Yeah, but I suppose I'm thinking more, when we talk about intelligence in animals, I'm thinking more about, let's say, chimpanzees, for instance, who can communicate. If you use sign language with them, you can have a whole conversation with a chimp.
Yeah.
You know, they can carry out activities, they act in similar ways, not necessarily in mannerisms, but in terms of, you know, I think that most of the studies have kind of concluded that chimpanzees are the closest to humans in terms of just function, social aspect, that's everything. You know, even if we look at humans as a sort of, I don't know, multi-dimensional thing, it's not just the ability to be logical or the ability to make decisions, it's also the social aspect, what happens when humans are around other humans, or, you know, the emotional aspects, and then there's the physical aspect and the mental, you know, all the rest of it comes into afterwards. But if we go between what separates us from chimpanzees, it then becomes much more like, well, you can have a very respectable, suited and booted chimpanzee raised in a home, and, you know, we've seen, obviously, animal cruelty will complain anyway, but we've seen people who have adopted chimps, raise them as children, communicate with them, and have them out doing their own thing. The only difference is, I guess, if we look at emotion response, what humans do when they're angry versus what animals do when they're angry, or what humans do when they're afraid versus what animals do when they're afraid, I'd say that's where we differ. But is that not just something that's developed over time because socially certain behaviours became unacceptable for humans? So bashing someone over the head when they get on your nerves isn't really socially acceptable, morally either. Whereas for animals... Oh, hang on.
Pause right there.
Yeah.
So that's an interesting way to look at it, I believe. The way you put it. I think there's no doubt that they have intelligence, but at the same time, is that comparable to the intelligence that's in demand to be or to create what we've created? I beg to differ. I don't think it's as great as, you know, what humans were at the time that they were. And maybe perhaps it's because they never really had to evolve, or the need to evolve wasn't as great as somebody or like a human. Do you get what I mean? I think it could be a situation where, because they had so much greater innate ability to kind of overcome their situation, they never put themselves in this great, almost like a compressive situation where it was so great in turmoil, or the need to be better, to be more, to need to evolve over such a long period of time. It wasn't comparable to like a human being where, you know what, I have to think my way out of everything because I wasn't strong enough to protect myself or to fight off a bear or a lion. You know, I'm not the king of the jungle, so it's almost like you turn to your brain. You had no choice but to evolve and utilize what you have, which is your intellect. And so maybe over time, that's that just, that's your go-to over time, whereas their instincts, their physical attributes were their thing. But so we kind of drifted away in terms of like comparisons to each other. But at the same time, in the end, it proved that the mind would always win over matter, in a sense, because whether it's, we're saying we're using things or we're creating things, at the same time you have to think it, or you have to be able to you have to have that ability to make that not only a possibility but a fact. Do you get what I mean? Whereas they just didn't have that ability, and I feel like in the end, I think the reason why I'm saying all this, I feel like it all comes down to a greater level of chaos, in a sense, which is almost like a predisposition for evolution. This is kind of like where I'm going with this.
Go on.
So it's almost like the person, or like humans perhaps maybe had a greater level of chaos or disaster coming their way, and which kind of allowed them to evolve in a way that was not only effective in a long term perspective, but it was also effective in making them the perfect almost candidate, like I said, to kind of like not only figure their way through their own situation, but to take over, but to grow, to grasp, and to evolve into not necessarily king of the jungle, but my gun's bigger than yours. My stick is bigger than yours. I've got a fence, so what am I worried about your claws for? Do you get what I mean? Alright, you stay here. I see that sun's about to explode. I'm gonna jump on my spaceship. I'm gonna go find another planet. I'm gonna take off and leave the Earth. It's a dead planet. You just don't know it yet. Do you get where I'm going from with this?
I suppose maybe the question that I would sort of have in response then is, would you not attribute that human ability to develop and grow and evolve, would you not attribute that to us being sort of biologically, let's say, predisposed to, not even biologically predisposed, just biologically lucky to have been born with the kind of brains that will allow for such development and, progression?
Well, I think my retort would be, the first thing would be, what exactly is luck? Do you know? And I feel like... Go on.
No, I was going to answer just to say, in this scenario, luck would be where we're on top, in the way that we are, let's say. But
are we on top by chance alone, or because we made it so?
So
I don't feel like it was by design. I think it was more to do with a demand that we kind of eventually overcame, and through evolution, obviously, but also through growth, through developing, overcoming obstacles. And so maybe there was a constant evolution because we had no choice. it's literally like, you know, when you think about a case where it's almost like do or die, you know, fight or flight. Isn't that you know, predicate on the whole situation, do or die. So
yes, I suppose what I'm thinking is more. Obviously, this isn't an actual question because I'm assuming you don't have the answer. I don't know if anyone does. But if we then go back, let's say then to early man, Neanderthal, much stronger than we were today, but only lived to like say 30.
Yeah.
Much more predator based than we are now.
Yes.
And while some might say dumber, but more instinct-based humans.
Yeah.
What is it then? And like I said, this isn't really a real question, but I suppose it's what I'm wondering is what would it have been pushed them past that and required, let's say, according to your chaos theory, required the need to evolve and to develop, because if they were relatively strong enough to be themselves, let's say, hunt, kill, eat, survive, maybe not all the time, but maybe in the same ways that animals do, build, find shelter, know when it's time to go home, when it's time to sleep, etc.
Yeah.
I wonder what it would have been, chaos-wise, that would have forced that next step in evolution for them. Because I suppose, as you were talking, I was thinking a little bit about sort of modern day examples adapting, and like the main one that came to mind was the pandemic.
Yes.
And you know, those first couple of weeks, I'd say, where it was like everyone working from home, the shops had all those shops had all those X's outside, and you had to stand and line up, and then someone would wave you through. Like, do you remember what it was like at the very beginning of it?
I remember, yeah.
And when I'm thinking about how that was then, and then how quickly we all got used to that, you know, it take long before it felt normal to queue, before you were aware, and you just, I'm wearing a hat because I'm going to be standing outside for 10 minutes because I've got a queue, or I've got to, you know, so evolution in that sense, I can see what you're saying as far as, yes, when humans are up against something, we turn and we mold into it, and we go, okay, this is what I'll do instead.
I would say, I would say it like this. I'll start like this. It just in the sense of like, you know, they have this saying, this religious saying, man can't survive on bread alone. And I feel like in this situation, into this evolutionary relativity situation we're talking about, I would say men can't survive on instincts alone. And so, but I would say it would begin with awareness. You know, because you can have all the instincts in the world, but if you're not aware of your situation, it's hard to really change it. I think that's where the draw between being the greatest of who you are, or knowing that you can only be so much within your situation unless you make changes, unless you're greater than you are. And so that means you have to up your levels. You have to go up a scale, up another scale, up another scale, until you dominate your environment, in a sense. If you think about the pandemic, like you said, what was the main thing about that? We had to stay inside. Again, men can't survive on bread alone. Most people was flipping out. You couldn't just be inside all the time. And so before you know it, everybody was trying to break until they had to put fines out for people because they didn't want to stay in their house. Do you get what I mean? And I feel like it's kind of like a similar situation where people were starting to find a way, they were starting to resist and find ways to resist. And so there was only so much they could manage the situation in terms of like keeping people as least sociable as they could, because people were starting to find a way. And that breathes, that goes back to the whole idea of like, you know, the thinking to actually be aware of your situation and not just lay down and just, you know, wallow in your situation to the point where it's almost like, okay, I've driven myself crazy, as you would in a place where you can't, you're locked up like a prison, but you would actually find a way around it, in a sense, which would breathe you kind of like beating the game, in a sense. That's kind of like a cheat code. And if you think about a gun, isn't a gun basically like a cheat code?
100%.
So it's just kind of it just takes me back to there, because maybe men are not as maybe, you know, far out to the point where it's almost like impossible to catch them in terms of intelligence pertaining to animals, even though we are more than compared to them. But I think in terms of awareness, we are greater in that sense. Great, aware enough to figure, I'm not gonna beat this guy, I'm not gonna beat this lion with my bare hands. Let me cheat the game. Let me get myself a knife. Let me make myself a gun. And I think that's where things change. The awareness.
Yeah, I agree maybe with one small terms and conditions kind of situation, where the awareness is definitely a large part of it.
Mm-hmm.
But then I also think that, and maybe this is me kind of going back to that luck of the draw concept, where our brains are just able to do more than the animal brains can. And the reason I suppose that I say that that's a slight contradiction to what you're saying is only because when you're talking about that, okay, yeah, I can't beat this lion, so I need to do this, okay, you know, the ability to look at something, make a decision, requires a certain amount of self-awareness and other awareness and surroundings awareness. And so, yeah, the reason that I was sort of contradicting that is to some degree we can see that in animal behaviour.
Yeah.
You do see surroundings where animals assess the situation and go, I might die. Time to get out of here, or that don't look too great. I'm going to hide until it's gone. Yeah. You know, so that's why I do feel like there's still elements there. Maybe those are the instinct things that we share with animals. But then where we're superior is our brains are able to make different calculations and maybe further thought processes that go beyond instinct and go beyond, you know, environmental factors, because that's everything. Like you said, you know, even in an environmental situation, humans don't necessarily fold into the brain. We tend to, you know, not tend to rebel, but we have the ability to rebel against it and to move into whatever, after a certain amount of time in a certain environment, adapt to that environment entirely, whether it's growing fur or whatever else. Humans, no matter how much cold we sit in, we don't really grow fur like that. So yeah, I suppose I do agree on a large part, just in terms of, yes, we are clearly, you know, the superior mammal or the superior animal in this current stage in existence. Whether or not that will continue, I'd say, is something we don't know.
True. The only thing I would ask you is, when you say, you know, you see certain aspects of what we were discussing in animals, Are we? And they will be like, they'll run away or anything in that situation where they feel they're outmatched. Are you saying that because they're outmatched physically and they know it, or it's just a thing where like they're scared and they back down?
Yeah, I think for the most part it's just the fear, because we've seen where they get scared of their own shadow, and we've also seen with their own reflection, and that obviously has very little to do with awareness of I am X amount size and that person is X amount size, but more just to do with the general threat fear. So that is more instinctive level of maybe comparison. I suppose maybe I was thinking more like when they do certain tests with animals where they get them to solve puzzles.
Yes.
I suppose that's the part about awareness, where it's like, they need the bigger rock to fill the hole, and eventually they get round to trying all the rocks and go, I think I need the bigger rock. They don't like the same thing over and over and over and over and over and over again, regardless, because then that would show a lack of awareness, or a lack of intelligence, or a lack of ability to learn.
Well, that's the. I would say that's a different argument, because I'm not arguing that they're not intelligent. I'm arguing they're not as intelligent to where we were, or where we are.
Yes, I agree with that. Like I said, but I think that might be more of a luck of the draw thing, where we happened to have been in a situation where, to begin with, we had more brain matter, let's say. So when it came to evolution time, our brain already had bits and pieces that just needed to go, okay, boop, 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 and turn into what we needed it to be, for us to end up being the superior ones, let's say. That's just my stuff, though.
No. I get that, but me personally, I don't believe in luck. So if it happens for a reason, or it happens in a way where it's almost like I made it happen. I demanded the chance be more, the likelihood of my survival be that this needs to happen, and so I would make it happen. And like I said, this comes back to what I was saying about the idea of a disaster situation, and I need to think my way out of this. Because if you think about human tools in terms of our biological tools to get themselves or solve a situation, it's pretty much like that. When we're in a situation where it's do or die, we pretty much tend to do or die, and you're either great enough to overcome your situation and figure things out to survive, or you don't.
I suppose maybe along those lines, even if you were to look at how humans use their own brains, even unconsciously, as tools in disasters, then that could be another. I suppose this is in support of what you're saying, because I suppose when you think about people who are able to dissociate in terms of extreme stress, and legit, I'm not here. It's not normal. Obviously, it's an extremely powerful example of the brain. But still an adaptive, thing that they, in terms of the body or the brain or the human needing to make a decision or needing to do something to escape their current circumstance, then we could say the brain's version of, I don't know, shutting down the system in terms of fear, or in times of danger, or, moving blood away from us when we're threatened, or, those kind of things that the body does without us being conscious of. Those things I would say, okay, well, maybe that is then linked in with the idea of, when someone experiences a certain amount of trauma, their brain might legit shut off their fear area or something, because it's like, well, in the past, this didn't work for us. Too many things happened up there, we're just going to shut that part of the brain down. So in that aspect, I would say, we have that ability, that I suppose, would be harder to identify in animals.
Oh yes, but of course it's there, but I don't feel I just don't feel it's there in as high a level as you would witness in like human behavior. Do you get what I mean?
I agree.
But totally. Right. I think we're gonna leave it there. As an interesting debate, Jade.
Very interesting one. Very interesting. I feel like I need to pull up one old philosophy books now and read about determinism and fatalism and something.
Hey, bring it. Should be interesting. But of course, thank everyone for listening, and appreciate the support as always. And we're going to leave it there today. Jade, thanks for coming through and spending some time chopping out with me. And so take care, and until next week, everyone, take care.